Hi everyone, we're going to talk today about two artworks. The first one is And There's Nothing to Be Done by a very famous Spanish painter, Francisco Goya. This is going to be form, function, content, context. So if you have a paper notebook, you can set it up and go ahead and pause the video here for about 2 minutes. Okay, so this is called And There's Nothing to Be Done, and it's from a series called The Disasters of War by Francisco Goya. One thing I'm going to talk about in a little bit is you see how the dates here, 1810 to 1823, are when this series was created, but it was not published until 1863, and we're going to talk about that. And then for the form, we have all this info about that indicates that it's an etching. So if you remember the Rembrandt etching you had, it's the same kind of thing, and I'll talk about that. So this is what this particular etching looks like. We're going to start with context, and there's going to be a lot of information, but you can summarize things, and you can also, if you want to, put a note to see slide 104, and you'll be able to find that info later. Okay, so let's talk about what is this painting even going to be about, and then the artistic movement as well. So this is in the period after the French Revolution, when the French Emperor Napoleon was trying to conquer Europe. And he set out trying to basically take over all of Europe as part of the French Empire. When he got to Spain, he told that Spanish king that he wanted to pass through Spain, not actually take over Spain and get to Portugal. And he was allowed to try to pass through the country. But instead, that was all a lie. And Napoleon instead overthrew the king and put his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne. This led to a bloody war within Spain as the Spanish people revolted against French rule. So this series is part of a series of etchings, 82 images, showing the horrors of this war, which was called the Peninsular War because it's the Iberian Peninsula. And Goya named this series The Disasters of War. This was not printed until 35 years after Goya's death. Due to the political views that were expressed in here, he did not feel like it was safe to have it published in the time that he was still alive. And it shows issues that different groups faced in the war. It shows actual conflict, famine, disappointed rebels. So after the revolt, the king was put back on the throne with no reforms. And we actually learned a similar painting already called the 3rd of May, which I'll show you in a minute, and I think some of you will recognize. This is a new artistic movement. So we've been talking about neoclassicism. Now, the next couple of days, we're going to look at romanticism. Romanticism is all about emotion. So even though it has the word romantic, it could include romantic love because that's an emotion, but the art we're going to look at really doesn't show romantic love. It's just about expressing different emotions. So if we contrast that to a work of art we just recently looked at, the Oath of Horatii, which was neoclassical, and it was very, the men in Oath of Horatii are very strong and don't look like they have a lot of emotion. Instead, Goya is using romanticism. So romanticism emphasizes emotion through color, dramatic light, emphasis on the individual, and it's a reaction to the Enlightenment. So neoclassicism, we said, was tied to the Enlightenment, where people wanted to go back to these values of the classical period. They wanted to promote like justice and liberty and these things. And so it kind of removed emotion and human feeling out of it. But romantics believe emotion is a valid way of understanding the world, not just reason and rational thought like the Enlightenment promoted. But it did hold on to the Enlightenment views of individual freedom and being against political repression, which we'll see here. So go ahead and pause here if people need a few more minutes to finish writing stuff down. So I'm just going to show you some of the others in the series just so you get an idea. So it's extremely violent. This one, Spanish man is about to cut off the head of a French soldier with an axe. This man's about to be executed. There's a lot of like really horrific stuff. And that painting that you just caught a clip of is this one, the 3rd of May. I don't know if you remember, but we did an activity with this when I was teaching you about line the very first week of school. And this is also by Francisco Goya, also about this war. So we had the Spanish over here, and we talked about how we're supposed to feel sympathy for them. And then here's the French. They're just like a faceless, evil enemy. So if you remember that painting, it's the same artist. And that was Oath of Horatii that we looked at a couple days ago. So this is neoclassical. And although the women have emotion, the real message of the painting is like this strength and these Enlightenment ideals. And it really removes the human emotion out of it. Okay. And then this is just a map of Napoleon's expansion. So all the territories that were part of the French Empire are in the darker or the lighter blue. And then the pink are French allies. So he really conquered a lot of Europe. And here's Spain that had fallen under French control. Okay, so let's start with form. So this is an etching. And it's not as if Goya couldn't have done painting for these artworks, but he chose etching probably for specific reasons. The etching creates a lot of nuanced light and dark. And I'm just going to review how you do an etching. Again, you should kind of already know this from the Rembrandt etching that you had for homework last week. But in an etching, you cover a metal plate with wax. Then you use a tool called a burin, which is in the identifiers, to scratch through the wax and expose the metal. Then you put it in acid and it bites the metal, which is like it carves into the acid, carves into the metal. And so the parts that are exposed will be bitten by the acid. You'll remove the wax and then apply ink. And the ink will go into the acid, like the lines that have been bitten. Now, in the identifiers, it also uses the term dry point. Dry point is when you scratch directly onto the metal plate. So he made an etching, but then after he removed the wax, he did additional scratching onto the plate with his tool without the wax. All right, so let's talk about the content of this artwork. So we have this figure. He's tied to the wooden pole. He's blindfolded and his head is hanging down. He really kind of looks like he's given up. But he's dressed all in white, which kind of puts like a spotlight on him. If we're thinking of what light and dark might represent, I think the light also represents maybe like good in the world. And so the figure tied to the pole represents one of the Spanish. and he's about to be shot by the French army. And we can see others back here who are about to be shot. This guy is like a pretty gruesome image. So this guy has already been killed. And you can see there's like blood or brains spilling out onto the ground around him. And Goya uses, I think, the etching really masterfully to create implied lines that move our eye around, because you can see the etching already has this like horizontality to it. And then we have these 3 gun barrels over here that create an implied line and draw our eye right over to the central figure. And then, kind of similar to the painting from the beginning of the year, by having just the barrels over here, it creates the faceless executioner again, which I think definitely implies evil. And then we have more French soldiers here who are about to execute these guys. So one of the things that Goya does in his work, and then it's common in lots of different art, is he's displaying the central figure almost as a Christ-like figure. And there's a term for that, which is alter Christus, but it just means another Christ. So I think we see that really well in the 3rd of May, where this man has his arms spread, kind of similar to Jesus on the cross. And then here, the man is tied up. Again, not quite the same, but a similar idea. And by doing that, it really is emphasizing their innocence. So the metaphor would be Jesus was totally innocent, and yet he still died on the cross for people's sins. And here, these men are totally innocent, and they're being killed by these evil French soldiers. And Goya also creates a contrast, because we have the feeling between the 2 groups is very different, and he does that visually. So the victims look very chaotic, like they're all kind of slumped over, irregular shapes, whereas the French army looks very orderly and regular, kind of like a repeating pattern. So we get that from the gun barrels here. We get that from the soldiers all lined up. And we got that in the painting you saw as well. Okay, so for the function, Goya is showing the war against the French from the Spanish perspective. It's very clear that he is sympathetic to the Spanish, because the French here are evil and the Spanish are innocent. And that, of course, makes sense because Goya himself is Spanish. So he's showing it from the Spanish perspective. Another message that I think he's putting out there is that war brings out the inhumane. War brings out the inhumane. Because these images are really, this one and the other ones I showed that are part of the series, are pretty gruesome, and it's really kind of commenting on the terrible things that humans do to each other in a time of war. So coming back to the artistic style of Romanticism, Romanticism is supposed to exhibit emotion, which I think we definitely see here, and it's also supposed to kind of draw that emotion out of the viewer. And so here we're definitely meant to feel sympathy for the Spanish. All right, we're going to go to another work of art, which is Liberty Leading the People by Eugene Delacroix. For this one, we're going to do annotate a diagram, so you can paste it in the center of the page. So go ahead and pause here and take a couple minutes to prepare that one. Okay, before we talk about this one, I'm going to go back to my context notes. I should have done this before the first artwork, but we've been talking in the last week or so about the Enlightenment and all the ideas coming out of the Enlightenment and how that inspired neoclassical art. And then something else that I'm sure all of you know from history class is that the Enlightenment also inspired revolutions. So people were inspired by Enlightenment ideas like individual rights, popular sovereignty, social contract. The American Revolution was fought over those ideals, and also the French Revolution. So the French Revolution occurred in 1789. The French revolted against the excess of the monarchs, and King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were overthrown and executed. It was a very bloody and violent revolution. And this led to social classes being abolished in France and the power of the Catholic Church being way lessened in France. And Napoleon came after this. And then we're going to talk about liberty leading the people, which is not about this French Revolution, but about another French Revolution that comes a few years later. All right, so here is Liberty Leading the People, which is a very famous painting. I'm going to give you a little bit of context. So let's talk about the history of what is actually being represented here. And the thing that's actually being represented is highlighted. So after Napoleon was defeated, they put a king back on the throne in France, which is kind of crazy because they had fought this whole bloody French Revolution, which you learn about in history class. Napoleon had come through and been an emperor. And now after that, we're just going to have another king. Like, even after we executed the king, it seems not quite right. And so this represents an event that took place after that. You can see about 15 years after Napoleon, called the July Revolution of 1830. The king at the time, King Charles X, had repressive policies. He was not honoring like the Enlightenment ideas or the ideas of the French Revolution. And through this revolution, a new king took over, Louis Philippe. He was called the citizen king, which meant that he was supposed to be more in touch with the people. So this is unique in that I told you recently that history painting in Europe was seen as a really high art form. So like Oath of Horatii, people loved it. It's this huge painting, dramatic historical event, even though it's kind of mythological. But often these things are from way in the past. This is unique because Delacroix is taking something that is a current event, has just happened, and painting it in a similar way as this grand history painting. So he's kind of elevating current events to the status of history painting. And this is also a romantic or part of the Romanticism movement. So the Romanticism movement emphasizes drama and emotion. In this painting especially, bright color and loose brushwork add to the drama. And like I told you with the Goya, Romanticism was in some ways a reaction to the Enlightenment because the Enlightenment focused on rational thought, but Romanticism said emotion is also important for human understanding. The artist Delacroix was formally trained in French painting at one of the official French schools. And like I said, history painting was considered the highest form of art, but he wants to elevate a modern event to the same level using the same kind of setup. So go ahead and pause here to finish writing stuff down, and then we'll move on to describing what's in the painting. I put this picture in. Here's the painting hanging in the gallery today, just so you can see it's a very large painting, typical of how history paintings were done. Okay, so let's describe the painting. We're going to annotate, so I encourage you to draw arrows, make text boxes, etc. Okay, let's start in the center. So we have here liberty. So the title of the painting is Liberty Leading the People. So she's clearly the leader. People are following after her. She's an allegorical figure. So she represents an idea. So think about the Statue of Liberty, how she's not like a specific person. She represents the idea of liberty, and that's the same here. So she's giant. If they were all on the same level, she would be a lot bigger than the other people in the painting. And she's wearing a yellow dress that has fallen down. Her bare breasts are definitely a classical reference. So when we have seen nude women like this, they're often Venuses. So the idea of including that references what people at the time thought were great government values, like those of the Greeks and Romans. So we talked about that in neoclassicism, but it's referencing things like democracy from Greece or the Roman Republic, which people felt at the time was something great that they preferred instead of an absolute monarchy. And she's holding the flag of the French Revolution. So this flag of 3 colors, or tricolor flag, red, white, and blue, is the flag of the French Revolution. So even though this is a revolution taking place after the French Revolution, it's showing that people are still pressing forward to get those ideas of liberty and good government and all that. And then in the other hand, she's holding a musket with a bayonet on it. Here's the word bayonet over here. And so the musket obviously is for shooting at people, and then the bayonet they've used in like hand-to-hand combat to stab people. So this is definitely showing we're not going to achieve these revolutionary ideals that we want without fighting. And if we think about kind of the attitude or feeling of Lady Liberty, she looks really confident. She is climbing over this barrier here. She's striding forward. She's kind of looking back behind her to make sure people are following her. And one other symbol that is important is this right here, this little hat is called a Phrygian cap, which is this word over here. That is a clear symbol of freedom. So in ancient Rome, when slaves were freed, they would receive one of these. And so it became just a symbol of freedom that became associated with the revolution. Okay, let's now talk about all the other people involved here, because there's messages in the other people as well besides just Lady Liberty. All right, this guy here. We have a man in the colors of the revolution, red, white, and blue, looking up at Lady Liberty. So those colors again represent revolutionary ideas like freedom, representative government. And then the other interesting thing that Delacroix does is he puts people who are clearly of different social classes. So this guy with the top hat is clearly upper class. and he's holding a hunting rifle as opposed to like a military weapon. So he's clearly upper class. This man here is a much different social class. He is holding a saber or sword that shows that he was previously, like he fought in the Napoleonic Wars, but he's wearing the clothing of a factory worker. So he's probably a working class, lower class person. Over here, we have a child who looks like he should be in school, and he's actually wearing like a hat and a messenger bag that kids might carry to school at the time, and he's wielding 2 guns. Over here, we have a person who's in the military who's already been killed, and we can tell that by the uniform that he's wearing. So the message of all of that is that all people are going to unify for the good of France. They're all going to unify behind these revolutionary ideals in order to make change happen. This man here is wearing a nightshirt, and he only has 1 sock on. He's already been killed, this guy's already been killed, and there's other people who have already been killed. The message of that is that this freedom is going to come at a cost. So the revolutionary ideals are clearly not going to be achieved without a struggle, and it's going to be violent. The guy wearing the nightshirt, you don't have to write this down, but it's almost like he, for whatever reason, was pulled out of bed. Like this revolution is affecting everyone, and it's changing rapidly. And then you can kind of see Lady Liberty stepping on a barricade, and then here's like stones that would have been part of the street. Here's a bunch of stones that would have been part of the street. A lot of pieces of wood. And in this revolution, this is like what really happened, that the people of Paris dug up their streets and created barricades to stop the troops, the French troops under the king, from moving about the city. And I'll just throw it out there. I don't know if anybody has ever seen either the play or the movie of Les Miserables, but that is the event that is being depicted here, is the same revolution that's in that really famous play. In the background here, we have the Notre Dame Cathedral, and here's the word Notre Dame here. This is a super famous Catholic church that was also kind of a symbol of the monarchy, or like a symbol of the old ways. So the fact that Lady Liberty and her followers are striding past it, like they're going to leave that old stuff behind. So let's just talk a little bit about Delacroix's technique. He uses lots of diagonals. So Lady Liberty is a diagonal. Look at how the guns all form these different diagonals. These guys are forming diagonals this way. This guy's going this way. Like there's lots of diagonals and crisscrosses, which creates a lot of movement and drama in the painting. And something that is more traditional is the painting kind of has a pyramid shaped composition. So it kind of forms like a triangle here. That's something we've seen back in the Renaissance with Leonardo's Last Supper. Like that is a very traditional element. Another thing that Delacroix uses in his work is he has looser brushstrokes. So in Oath of Horatii, we couldn't even see the brushstrokes. But he's using looser brushwork, and I think it really adds to the painting, giving it drama and movement. It kind of makes it feel like more energized. And this painting is more colorful. So that's just part of Romanticism that Delacroix employs here. And so Romanticism, again, it wants to elicit an emotional response. He wants people to look at this painting and be like, yeah, we're fighting for the revolution. And that's part of what Romanticism does, is elicit a response from the viewer. Also, again, he's trying to elevate a current event to this grand history painting. Oh, and this is Louis Philippe, who became the new king, who was called the Citizen King. This was the King Charles, who was overthrown in the July Revolution. So you can see even the way that they're dressed. Like, this guy is more modern, and that's what they believed was going to happen with his reign. So a couple practice questions. Eugene Delacroix took inspiration for his painting Liberty Leading the People from, so think of an answer in your mind. And it's a political uprising against a ruling king. So that's the July Revolution of 1830. The artist included the figures wearing the black top hats in the painting to indicate social class. So they're clearly upper class, yet they're mixing and fighting for the revolution just like the lower class. In Liberty Leading the People, Eugene Delacroix included which of the following compositional elements to elicit the idea that freedom comes at a great cost? And graphic depictions of the fallen and wounded tell us we're going to hopefully achieve these ideals, but it's going to be costly. And then this is just another famous painting by Eugene Delacroix. This is of a revolt of the Greeks against the Ottomans. And you can see again, like, it's super dramatic, definitely supposed to elicit an emotional response, which is what Romanticism is all about.